Hello, beloveds. You're listening to Through the Dark Woods podcast. I'm your host, Josia Tamara Crossley, and this is episode number 7 of Rooted in Thriving, our Grief Tending for Collective Liberation podcast series. And today we're going to be talking about deep self-care for grief tenders because it's critical with this work that we're serving from a place of wholeness rather than depletion and burnout. But before we dive in, I want to make sure that you know that next week on Tuesday, March 3rd at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern, we gather for a community grief and praise ritual to mourn what is dying in our world and to feed life with our full-hearted presence and celebration. This ritual is open to everyone and will be modeled after the grief and praise sessions that we regularly hold in our grief support community. If you're considering joining us in any of our programs or trainings, I'd really encourage you to come to this ritual so you can get a felt sense of what we're all about. And there's no better way to learn than to experience something firsthand. You don't need to feel celebratory to attend. You're welcome to bring your despair, your sorrow, your sacred rage, your anxiety, your heaviness, whatever you're feeling. The point is, we will be with it together and it will alchemize into something else because that is the nature of energy. It wants to transform, and given the right conditions, it will do just that. So there'll be opportunities to share, to express, to be witnessed, and everyone is invited to share and participate to the degree that's right for them. All the practices are invitational. This is a by donation event, and all proceeds go to our scholarship fund to support us being able to offer solidarity pricing for our programs and trainings for folks who are living and working in underserved communities. At the end of the ritual process, we will share more about our Roots of Ritual Grief Tending Foundations training, and we'll be available to answer any questions you might have about the training. If you'd like to learn more about the training now, link is in the show notes, or go to darkwoodsofgrief.com/roots-of-ritual. And if you'd like to register for next week's community grief and praise session, the link for that is also below in the show notes. So yay! Okay. So we have walked down a long road together through these 7 episodes of this series. And whether you've binged every episode or this is the first time you've joined us, welcome. And if you haven't listened to the rest of the series, particularly the last few episodes, I'd highly recommend you take the time to listen because there's definitely some gold in there. And this podcast is one of my favorite ways to be able to offer the teachings that I've spent a lifetime gathering for absolutely free. And yeah, you've heard stories from some incredible people who've been through their own rough initiations with grief and trauma and have transformed it into service for the world. In the first 4 episodes, when I interviewed 4 of my previous students of the grief tending and ritual facilitation trainings, some incredible stories there. And now we arrive here, almost at the end. So this final episode is one I feel so excited to talk about this with you today, because in my experience, this is the piece that is almost like most often overlooked. And if you don't have this piece in place, this is the one that will ultimately make or break you as a facilitator over the long haul. So we are talking about deep self-care for grief tenders. Because yes, it is absolutely critical with this work that we are serving from a place of wholeness and overflow rather than depletion and burnout and maybe martyrdom, right? So I want to start somewhere that might surprise you. Might be like, why are you talking about this? But you'll understand soon. So I want to talk about time, because I've come to believe that until we understand the difference between the kind of time that we were raised in and taught in, school and work and basically like existence in colonial society, that's one kind of time. And then there's the kind of time that this sacred work exists within. And all the self-care advice in the world just isn't going to land until you really understand the difference between these 2 types of time. Because what is the main complaint that you hear from literally everyone when it comes to self-care? I don't have time, right? So the ancient Greeks had 2 gods of time, and they're both important. And if you don't know both of them, then you might end up infinitely trapped in the subconscious worship of the god that the Western world worships unequivocally. And I'm not talking about our good friend Jesus. I'm talking about the God that you have been tricked into worshiping, whether you've been into a church or not, and since before you could write with crayons. This God is Kronos. Kronos is the Greek god of linear time, the kind that you can measure with the clock on the wall, the calendar filling up, the linear march from Monday to Friday and January to December. Kronos is quantitative. It can be counted, scheduled, optimized, and depleted. And it's the kind of time that says you're running out or you're behind, and, well, there are only 24 hours in a day after all. Kronos was depicted as an old man, steady, inevitable, and consuming. He keeps moving regardless of what's happening in your life or your heart. He doesn't slow down for grief. He doesn't pause for integration. He just keeps going. And something extremely morbid that Kronos was actually known for, eating his children. What? Okay. So Kronos is the dominant temporal reality of modern Western life, the 9 to 5, the productivity culture, the idea that your worth is measured by output per hour, and that if you're not producing, you're falling behind. And most of us were raised entirely inside Kronos time. And for a society based on enslavement of the lower class and prosperity of the 1%, it works quite well. But then there's Kairos. Kairos is qualitative time, the right moment, the opportune moment, the crack in the ordinary where something significant becomes possible. Kairos is not about duration, it's about depth. A 5-minute conversation that changes everything in your life is Kairos. The synchronicity of the moment that leads you to a revelation, Kairos. The ancient Greeks depicted Kairos as a young figure, bald at the back of the head, but with a long forelock at the front. The image itself was meant to be a teaching. You could only catch Kairos as he came towards you. Once he passed, there was nothing left to grab hold of. Kairos is the right time, divine timing, and sometimes just in the nick of time. From an animistic lens, I think of Kronos as like structure, the skeleton of reality, and Kairos as time as presence. So the soul moving through that skeleton, arriving fully in certain moments and igniting them. And when we step over the threshold into ritual or any type of creative work, we must cross the threshold into Kairos time. So if you think about what actually happens in grief ritual or in a grief tending circle, you schedule it in Kronos, right? You book the venue, you send the invitations, you plan the arc of the journey you're going to take people on. So you have like the outline. Kronos holds the container, and that's important. There's nothing wrong with that, right? We do need, I'm not saying we should abandon Kronos entirely, right? Kronos has this purpose, structure, form, the skeleton that makes it possible for something to happen. The moment someone's heart breaks open and something ancient moves through, that is Kairos arriving. You can't manufacture it, you can't plan it, you can't force it. You can only create the conditions that invite it and then stay present enough to recognize it when it comes. And grief work definitely lives in Kairos time, which means that you as a facilitator must be able to inhabit Kairos, to slow down enough to feel what is actually needed rather than what the schedule says. And this is what makes facilitation of grief and ritual work so particular and so demanding. Okay, you're not just running a program that's going to run according to a schedule. You're holding a living energetic field. You're present to the energies in the room, old energies, ancestral energies, the energy of unwitnessed sorrow that has sometimes been waiting for generations for a safe container. When we choose to engage in the practice of witnessing and creating space for humans to transmute their suffering, we are walking into some difficult terrain, and sometimes even dangerous terrain. This is holy work, and it requires vigilance. It requires that you stay clear in your own energy field so that what moves through your space doesn't stick to you. And if it does, that you clear it out afterwards, right? Because, and I say this with total love, If you are absorbing and carrying the energies that are released in your presence, you're not actually doing the work of helping to alleviate the energy of suffering on earth. You're just redistributing it to yourself, right? You're not actually transforming it. And the word for this is martyrdom. And sometimes experiencing martyrdom, this is a step on our healing path, right? As you learn how to transmute these energies rather than carrying them, it's like you go through this process of being like, oh, I'm carrying this heavy burden. Maybe I should or have to or whatever. But I definitely don't recommend it as a long-term strategy, right? We have to learn how to, one, hold our energy field and hold the field in a way that we're not picking up everything. And we have to learn to clear our energy after. And that is self-care. And there is a choice here, right? There's a choice where we choose to step into our sovereignty, energetically. And in order to have the capacity to hold the space fully, to be genuinely present to the suffering in the world, in the room, and then to return to yourself afterwards, that is the skill that we're cultivating. And here is something that I want you to really sit with. The world that we were handed runs on Chronos time, but the work that we do lives in Kairos. And we have to be able to embrace that in all phases of this work, in the preparation, in the work itself, the ritual or the circle itself. And most definitely, we cannot forget this in the integration and the recovery. Okay? So this is where Kairos becomes not just a philosophical concept, but a very practical guide. When you're integrating deep work, and let me tell you, as a facilitator, you are integrating like 10x. Okay. So like everybody in your room is going through a process and they're going to need to integrate that after, but you as a facilitator times 10, right? Because one of the most beautiful things about facilitating this work is that the work is also always working on you, right? And you can't integrate that in Chronos time. You have to give yourself deep rest and unscheduled blocks of time so that you can find Kairos, right? So that you can find that synchronicity, that flow, because that is the place of restoration and healing. And we access so much from that place of rest, imagination, generative ideas, right? Creativity. There's so much that comes from that. And, insights that we need to be able to do the work. Yeah. And it's beautiful because you have to give yourself this deep rest and unscheduled blocks of time, but also you'll be able to do this because when you are holding a larger container, right? If you structure your business model in a good way, you're going to be being paid more for holding that larger container as well. So you're spending less time with that container, but it is a bigger container. So you can afford to take more downtime afterwards. And it's not a question of if you should or not, it's like you have to. And this is it's such a beautiful positive feedback loop because the more that you're able to take that deep downtime and integrate the deep work that you're doing, the more powerful spaces for transformation that you'll be able to hold for your participants. And let me tell you, your participants, they're not paying you for Chronos time, right? They're not paying you for like, oh, thank you for holding space for me for 15 days in a row or whatever, right? Like, it's like, they don't want to do the work for 15 days in a row. They want to have the most transformation that they can possibly have in the shortest amount of time, right? Like, that's just reality. And so, not that having longer containers isn't a beautiful thing, but like, how can you have deeper transformation within the same container, right? And that happens through you integrating as a facilitator and being able to hold deeper and deeper space. So they're not paying you for Chronos time, they're paying you for Kairos time, right? For the depth. But you can't drop into deep presence when you're exhausted, when you're energetically cluttered from the last circle you held, or when you're running so hard on Chronos, tasking that you've lost touch with your own inner experience, right? So Kairos time requires spaciousness inside you to receive it, which is why also clearing your energy thoroughly after every significant container you hold is not even optional, right? And I mean, this is like, I'm constantly clearing, like daily practice, clearing my energy field. Absolutely. No matter what I'm doing. If I'm doing deeper work or holding more space, I'm doing it even more. And I'm not going to tell you how I do that right now, because it's more of a mentoring process to transfer that kind of knowledge, but that is something that we work with very much in our Roots of Ritual training, for sure. But I do want to mention that some of my favorite really basic personal clearing practices are, just really simply walking in nature near water, right? Cold water immersion, intense cardio, singing or toning, doing somatic work with the support of my amazing therapist and mentor, dancing if you have the energy for it, a hot bath with Epsom salts and a smudge. I also love going for a massage, and I find that that's super helpful when I'm too exhausted to clear my own energy myself. But what clears your energy will also be specific to you. So there's going to be some practices that resonate more with you than others. But the important thing is to know your practices before you need them, right? Not be trying to figure it out when you're already at the bottom and super depleted. So how you stay available to the work is, through taking that time, taking that downtime, resting, clearing your energy field. And like I said, I can go on and on here. There's so much to talk about in the realm of facilitator self-care, which is why, we have a whole module about it in our facilitator training, and we're constantly talking about it. And in a way, I think fundamentally, we need to shift how we view self-care, rest, and work. And again, this is a Kairos thing. There's a story told of a famous painter he's out one day in his backyard, and he's got his eyes closed, and he's laying on his lounge chair, and his neighbor peeks over the fence and says, "Oh, you're resting today, are you?" And the painter says, "No, I'm working." Right? And then a few days later, the painter is out in his yard with his canvas, and he's painting, and the neighbor again peeks his head over the fence, and he says, "Oh, working today, are you?" And he says, "No, I'm resting." And so, like, fundamental switch in what we think of as being work, right? Because it's so important that when we're doing this kind of work, that it lives more in the Kairos time. We have to be able to take that downtime, because a tremendous amount of generative creativity and depth of knowing and power and insight comes from this downtime. So let's break this into the practical reality of building a sustainable facilitation practice. If you were to think about elite athletes, so not the ones who train casually like me, going to the gym like 3 times a week, right? But we're talking about the ones performing at the absolute edge of their capacity. The singular thing that separates a high performance athlete from one who burns out or gets injured is not how hard they train. It's recovery. Intentional, strategic, deeply prioritized recovery. Rest days, sleep, nutrition, working with people who help them process what happened in the last game before they go into the next one. And you, if you're doing grief tending work, and especially grief ritual work, you're doing high performance work, right? The grief space you hold when you're truly deeply present, that is high level energetic output, right? And it requires high level recovery. And there's also something else I want to name, because it's very practically important. So moving into holding group work, holding circles and rituals rather than just one-on-one individual sessions, it genuinely can allow you to make more income in less time, right? So instead of seeing 5 individual clients in a week, you hold, one group of 15, and the economics of your livelihood shift significantly again. So I think it's something significant to consider. And of course, it's a process to move towards that, because group work takes more energy. Holding a Kairos container for 10 or 15 people in grief is a different ask than sitting with one. The field's bigger, the energies are more complex, the unpredictable Kairos moments are more frequent. Your nervous system, your presence, your spiritual reserves are called upon at a different scale entirely. And so, yes, you can earn more with group work, and you need to rest more deeply afterwards. This is not a contradiction. This is the design. And honoring that design means stepping out of chronos, out of the colonial industrial idea that productivity is the measure of worth, that rest is something you earn rather than something you require, that you should be fine by Wednesday because that's what the calendar says, right? Your work has seasons. It has full moons and dark moons, intensities and recoveries. When you hold a grief ritual, you're not just spending hours, you're spending depth. You're drawing from a well of Kairos presence that took real time and real tending to fill, and it will take real time to refill. And I also believe that our bodies have cycles of their own that we need to consider in this as well. Particularly for women, our moon cycles govern our cycles of productivity and rest in a huge way, as my dear friend Stasha Washburn describes in depth in her book, Bloody Brilliant Business, which I highly recommend if you run your own business. So building your schedule to honor the cyclical nature of our work, actually putting recovery time into your schedule, not scheduling another group or workday the day after you've just held a big container, giving yourself the week of quiet and integration and nature and nourishment. This is so necessary. That is how you do this work for a lifetime instead of burning out in 3 years. And it also means resisting the very real cultural pressure, especially for women and especially for helpers, to be always available, to be always giving, to measure your worth by how much you produce or how much you're needed, right? Your capacity to be fully present when you need to be present is the gift you offer, and you need to protect it like the very sacred resource that it is. Okay, and I want to just shout out the book 10x is Easier Than 2x by Dan Sullivan, which I learned this idea of working with Kairos and Chronos from, and also in terms of temporal mind shifts. I want to shout out Rashida Phillips and her book Dismantling the Master's Clock on Race, Space, and Time. Such an incredible book. And yeah, we've arrived now at the end of our journey through this series on grief tending for collective liberation. And over these 7 episodes, you've met 4 of the incredible graduates of our grief tending and ritual facilitation trainings. We've talked about somatic grief work, the most important skill for grief tending. We've discussed building sustainable offerings and how to market your work in a pragmatic, consent-based, relational way in our last episode. And now we've talked about the sacred responsibility of tending yourself so that you can tend others. And it's been such a pleasure to be here with you. I want to leave you with this. The world is starving for people who know how to do this work, who can slow down enough to be genuinely present, who've done their own grief work, who know what it is to walk through the dark woods and return with a map of the terrain. And if any part of what you've heard in this series has called to something in you, if you feel that pull, that recognition that, yeah, this is the work that I'm meant to do, there is a path forward. The Roots of Ritual Grief Tending Foundations training is a 4-month journey that teaches in depth everything we've touched on in this series and so much more. The skills, the frameworks, the ritual structures, the embodied practices that allow you to do this work safely and sustainably. It's where you get even more intimate with any of your own ungrieved losses while learning to hold space for others. And it's where you will find your community, the other people who feel this call in their bones, and, deepening into work like this in a community of people who are also called. It's such a powerful journey. And we're currently enrolling for our March 2026 cohort. We begin on March 24th. And I would love to invite you into the circle. You can find the link to all the details in the show notes. And yeah, like I said, we begin March 24th. And wherever you are in your own dark woods, whether you're walking through grief yourself or being called to hold the lantern for others, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for caring about this. The world needs more people like us. Thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day. All right, bye for now.